Okay, so welcome guys. Thank you guys for coming to the study. I appreciate you guys taking the time and I'm happy that you guys are still moving forward with this even though like we don't always show up. So today I'm excited to talk about Bartholomew, the apostle, aka Nathanael. So I'm gonna get into that. So some of the things I'm gonna get into, I know we have 30 minutes, so I'll try my best to keep it short. We might not be able to get into number 4, but I'll talk about the origins, the divine calling of Bartholomew, the martyr, him as a martyr, and the non-canonical books that he supposedly wrote. So first off, origins. Does anybody know anything about Bartholomew? Okay. So one thing about him is that he was also known as Nathanael or Nathanael. This is something that we assume as, in our doctrine and most doctrines, although some people do disagree, some scholars. So Bartholomew is never mentioned in the gospel. Bartholomew is always mentioned in the list of the 12 disciples, and the only time that he's not mentioned is in the book of John. There's a list of the disciples, and instead of his name, it's the name Nathanael. So because of that, we assume it's interchangeable. It's the same one. It's the only one missing, and Nathanael's not specifically mentioned in the other ones. So that's why we assume that Bartholomew and Nathanael are the same person. So many modern scholars disagree, and some think that they were two people, but we generally agree that they're the same person. So Bartholomew, there's not too much to know about him. He's not one of the big ones, like we would say Mark, Luke, John, the ones that wrote the books. But he was one of the 12 main disciples. In the entire New Testament, his name only comes out in 4 lists of the 12 apostles. And I listed the verses there. He doesn't really have any distinguishing qualities, like they don't really get much, the Bible doesn't really get much into his background or just really anything specific about him. So we only really know his name, and that's pretty much it. So he, along with other disciples, we know what happened with him because we know when all the 12 disciples are mentioned, he participates in that. So we know that he witnessed Jesus' ministry for about 3 years. And then after Jesus died, he was part of the movement that began to spread around the world, known as Christianity. This makes Bartholomew one of the most important and authoritative leaders of the early church, of course, because he likely helped spread the gospel to specific regions during the 1st century. But he's never specifically mentioned or singled out in any of the epistles. So we also know or assume, I guess, that he was a son of a man named Ptolemy. So this is something that scholars think because the name Bartholomew comes from Aramaic, which is what the tongue was at that time in ancient Israel. So it would be Bartholomew, and that means son of Ptolemy. So it's interesting that these names were really common back then. It was like if your dad was named, my dad's name Alfredo, so I would be like Bar Alfredo, and like my name would be Bar Alfredo, and just means son of Alfredo or daughter of Alfredo. That type of name is called patronymic, and they were common in ancient Israel. So because of that, it's very likely that his dad was Talmai, but again, it's an assumption that we make based off the history. He always appears right after Philip in the list of apostles. So because of that, some scholars conclude that they did ministry together. But again, it's not specifically implied that they went off together in any verse. And a lot of researchers and historians think that Bartholomew spread the gospel in India, Armenia, Ethiopia, Lycaonia, Mesopotamia, and or Parthia. And I'm just saying we assume or scholars think because again, we can't really take things that are not specifically in the Bible as for sure. So, but a lot of these things are, they're pretty uncontested. Okay, so Slido time. So if you guys go to the Slido, I will go ahead and display the first question. So the first question is, what is Bartholomew also known as? Timothy, Jimmy, or Nathanael? Nathanael, yes. Okay, looks like everyone got it right. 1 out of 1 got it right. So good job, whoever that was. Yes, it was Nathanael, not Timothy or Jimmy. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and get into his calling, Bartholomew's calling. So the only account written, literally the only information we have about Bartholomew is found in John chapter 1, verses 45 through 49. Philip was the one who found Nathanael. So in John 1:45, after Jesus called Philip to follow him, Philip went and looked for Nathanael and found him and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law." So saying God, this is not saying we found the son. He's saying we found who Moses was talking about, God. So that's an important specific thing that I think supports a lot of what we believe, that Jesus is God. And it says, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. This seems to imply that Philip and Nathanael were students of the law and the prophets. So they read together, or they just, were involved in studying together. And this also shows that Philip recognized from their study that Jesus was the Messiah they'd been waiting for. So that's really already a lot of information we have. I mean, it's a little bit, but like I said, if you really look at the details, he's saying he's God, and we know that Bartholomew that's something interesting about all of the disciples and a lot of the prophets mentioned. A lot of the people mentioned in the New Testament, that they were so knowledgeable about all the prophecies of prophets. They were consistently studying and just very expectant of Jesus. And that resonates with me, because it's sometimes I'm well, I already know what happened, but how important is it to we're expecting the second coming of Jesus, and it's important for us to really be knowledgeable and understanding and just constantly studying to know the truth. And so we can have a clear idea of, what we're looking for, because that's the only reason these people were able to spot the Messiah, and not just someone random who would just come along and say they were the Messiah. Okay, so then in verse 46, we see that Bartholomew responds and he says, "Nazareth, can anything good come from there?" This shows that he really held the town of Nazareth in the same way that a lot of the Jews probably viewed it, which was lowly, or I guess we would say a little bit ghetto-ish in our time, in modern slang. So Nazareth and all of the area around Galilee was seen as a low and wicked place. I guess maybe there was a lot of poverty, or people weren't very studious, or I'm not sure why. We don't really have much detail, but his response shows us ew, why from there? There's no way. So even Bartholomew, who was Galilean, was doubtful that anything good could come from there. So this is a reminder of Jesus' humble origins, and that he came to earth in the most humble possible manner. So that's so special. I mean, I feel like it's kind of ew, imagine Jesus came from Linwood. I mean, not Linwood, but it's interesting to see that perspective that he had, and just that at first he was skeptical because of that. And I think we've gotten into this before, how a lot of that's a big reason why a lot of Jews, the Pharisees, rejected Jesus, because they just had an idea that he was going to be so he wasn't going to be humble, and that he wasn't going to be the way he was. They thought he was going to be a leader that came from, or maybe a rich family or had a lot of political influence, but that's not at all how Jesus came. He came to just like a random, not random, but a family, just a normal family. And then in verse 47, we see that this is a little bit of insight into the character of Bartholomew through Jesus's eyes. When Jesus saw him coming, he said, "Here's a true Israelite in whom there is nothing false." The Greek word for false means deceitful, crafty, or full of guile. Jesus knew Nathanael's heart. So just like he knows what is in everyone's heart, he knew this statement is really penetrating. It's not saying like, "Oh yeah, I know this guy." It's just saying like, "Oh yeah, he's very, like, he has integrity." So Jesus like is assessing Bartholomew and judging him as someone that's true, a true son of Abraham, someone who worshiped the true and living God, like followed the laws without any deceit or without missteps, or hypocrisy that like many of the Pharisees and religious leaders of that day had, as we see all throughout the New Testament. So again, that just means someone who kept the law and abided by God's commandments, like a true Jew, a true Israelite, not someone who just kind of like religiously follows it. So this could also mean that Bartholomew came from a direct bloodline of Abraham and Jacob. So maybe it's also meaning like blood related. Oh yeah, like he comes from directly from there. So this is the central part of what like Bartholomew's big moment, I guess we would say, in the Bible, and something that's very telling. So verse 48 is the declaration of Jesus's divine nature and power, which we are very interested in as people who believe that Jesus is God. So Bartholomew asked Jesus, or Nathanael asked Jesus how he knew him. And Jesus replied, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you." Jesus wasn't present when Philip called Nathanael, obviously. And he's over here saying, "Oh yeah, the true Israelite, like I know who you are." But yet he had seen and heard their conversation, which is evidence of his omniscience. Does anybody know what omniscience means?
Isn't it kind of like all-knowing?
Yes, thank you, Adriel. All knowing, but it would be more specific, all seeing also. But no, actually, yeah, you're right. All ever present, I would say. Yeah, it's omnipotent, all powerful, omniscient, all seeing, all present. And then there's another one. So yeah, correct, Adriel. He said he knew not only Nathanael's words, but his heart. He knew exactly what their conversation was, and he knew every like characteristic about him, his heart, his intention, and his sincere character as well. So again, like I said, this is a very, very important moment, because this is showing us the type of power that Jesus had as a human, that God had as a human. It's a lot of people think, oh, he was just a prophet. Jesus was just a prophet. He was just the son of God, someone, a messenger, but nobody can have this amount of power, of ever presentness, of knowing everything other than God. So because of that, this is proof that Jesus is God. This like omniscience, like I said, it means seeing everything all at once at all times. Like just imagine that, like that the like the amount of power you need to have in your mind to know that. I mean, us with social media and stuff, like I get so overwhelmed by just you're flooded with things from random places on earth, or you're kind of in a way seeing many things at once, and it's so overwhelming. So this power that Jesus had, it's only can mean that he was God. So this also, like that brain power too, how did it fit? I don't know. This also reiterates a recurring theme in the Bible, which is predestination. Does anybody know what predestination is? I kind of wrote it, but does anybody have any thoughts on predestination or idea? what it is? A call on Miriam.
Um, I'm not sure.
Okay, that's okay. So right here I wrote, it's the idea, this is how I am defining it, but you can find more specific definitions, obviously. The idea that God knows us before we exist and that he chooses us before we are called. So the previous verse lets us know that Jesus saw Nathanael's heart and is likely why he chose him. So the way things went was Philip told, just like a lot of the disciples, Philip told Nathanael, then Nathanael went to Jesus. So it seems like, oh, Philip chose Nathanael and then Nathanael found Jesus. And we could also say that, oh, I found Jesus, I found God, but that's not true because Jesus is letting him know exactly what happened. Like, oh yeah, I knew who you were, I saw you and I liked you and then I made you come to me. That's not what he says, but that's essentially what happened. And that's what happens with us too. Like, how special is that we don't choose God. We don't love God before he loves us. He loves us before we love him. And he chooses us before we choose him. And why does God do that? How does God do that? I mean, that amount of judgment is really hard, I would say, because how do you choose someone before they act? How do you judge someone before they exist? And that's something only God can do. But we have a little preview here, and that's a recurring preview that we have throughout the Bible, that what stands out is our heart. So he saw Nathanael's heart. He's saying, you're real. Yeah, you're a true Israelite. You're actually devoted. You're honest. You're authentic. You know what I'm saying? Like, he saw his intentions and his heart, and that's what he liked. So how important is it to have our heart in the right place? And, that this just shows that that's what Jesus valued in Bartholomew and what he values in us too. So just a little quick detour, a little bit more of like some of the verses that kind of give us a little insight on this predestination or God's omniscience. This is something that I love. This is a topic that is so interesting to me. It says, Job 3:16 says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. Before you were a fetus, I appointed you a prophet to the nations. Like, wow. And then we have Psalm 139:16. It says, your eyes saw my unformed body, like my fetus. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. We already happened. Like, in God's eyes, all of our steps are already taken. That is so hard to understand, but it's so, if you understand it, if you look into it, it's beautiful because it's like it really shows you the love of God, the character of God, the true nature of God. It's really easy to be like, well, that's not fair. But when you really, really delve into it, it shows you actually the justice of God and his never-ending love for us. So another one is Isaiah 44:24. God, your Redeemer who shaped your life in your mother's womb, says, I am God. I made all that is. With no help from you, I spread out the skies and laid out the earth. Who shaped your life in your mother's womb? That's insane. So yeah, there's a lot of more examples, but this really connects to verse 48. And it shows us like a specific example throughout Jesus' life of this power that he manifests all throughout the Bible, all throughout his, existence. And then one verse that I really like, oh, I didn't write it's Psalm 51. I forgot what verse it is, but it says, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me, a righteous spirit, a straight spirit within me. This is so important. I feel like we should always pray about this because, like I said, this is what God looks for. And we don't really just come across a pure heart. We have to constantly be cleaned, constantly be choosing and devoted to him. So it's really important for us to pray in this way that David did. Like, that has to be created by God. So yeah, then last we have verse 49. Verse 49 says, Then Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. Jesus knew not only Nathanael's words, but his heart and sincere character as well. Nathanael or Bartholomew saw the attributes of divine omniscience. So he was like, whoa, like you knew my conversation, you saw me beforehand. And he realized Jesus' ability to discern hearts in the man who stood before him. So he was impacted and he believed. So Nathanael, although at first he was like Nazareth, he was like, whoa, like he understood. Nathanael's familiarity with Old Testament, like I said, the fact that he studied prophecies caused him to recognize Jesus for who he was. He knew about Moses and what he wrote, the law and all the prophets, and he's like, oh yeah, this is the one. The promised Messiah, Son of God and King of Israel. So like I said, there's not much specifically about Bartholomew, sadly, but he is the main character of this very important little interaction of where he sees him under the fig tree, and we start to see Jesus's true power. This is all we know about Bartholomew, but obviously everything that applies to all the apostles applies to him as well, which is he saw the risen Lord Jesus, and he was present when Jesus ascended to heaven after he resurrected. Okay, so Slido time again. All right, so here's the first question. What disciple told Bartholomew about Jesus? Oh, wait. A little bit. Philip. Yes, correct. Philip. Okay, and then the second question. What did Jesus say he saw? Where did Jesus say he saw Bartholomew? Under the fig tree, correct. There's two more people typing. Okay, well, yes, that's basically the answer, under the fig tree. Thank you, guys. Okay, so finally we have, okay, I might not be able to get into the fourth part, but Bartholomew, there's no biblical record of his death, but one tradition said that he was tied up in a sack and dropped into the sea. We can't confirm or deny this. Another tradition claims that he was crucified, and all traditions agree that he died a martyr's death, which means he was killed because of spreading the gospel, as did all the apostles except for John. But again, this is, scholars' understandings. So really quick, I'll just get into the canonical gospels, sorry. So what in the world is non-canonical? Does anybody know or want to guess? Okay, I'll call on Matthew.
Like non-canonical means like it's not part of like the true story, right?
Yeah, correct. So it's not part of the main of something we accept. It's their extra books basically. So the actual definition is they're a collection of ancient texts that were not included in the New Testament canon by Christians, us. So these writings constitute about a third of the Catholic Bible. So if you look, it's so confusing because a lot of times it's like, oh, the Christian people, the Christian Bible. But sometimes when they say Christian Bible or Christian people, they mean Catholics, which were not the same, obviously. And you can tell because the Bible is different. They have all these different books that we don't accept. So this is something I think I only asked last time, so that's why I just wanted to go into it a little bit more. So there's a lot of different gospels that are non-canonical that we don't accept. And they're usually involving accounts of the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, as well as any other writings that provide additional information about about the disciples and their walks and where they went. So they are largely dismissed or considered heretical to the orthodoxy for various reasons. So their exclusion, the reason they're not involved, they're not like accepted, is because they contradict the main gospels that are actually more verifiable and ancient than those books, and they contradict the information that we have about Jesus and the early Christian movement. So because of that, they don't really have the same level of authority or reverence as the canonical gospels, which are primary sources. So the two books that the Catholics accept and we don't about Bartholomew are the Book of the Resurrection of Christ by Bartholomew the Apostle, which was during 200 through 550 AD, and the Questions of Bartholomew. So I'll just really quickly go through this. So these texts were reconstructed from Coptic fragments and additional pieces of papyri, which was spoken in Egypt until the 7th century. So it has been hard for scholars to date the book. And the British Museum has manuscripts of this book from the 12th century. So there's fragments of the text that are much older, but scholars are undecided on the original date. Some place it as late as 5th or 6th century, giving similarities to other Coptic literature. Some scholars believe that this book is in fact the lost gospel of Bartholomew, although it is unclear what relationship this text have to the gospel. So why isn't it considered reliable? Because of the date of authorship. Like I said, it's not verifiable when it was written. It's way later than anyone who was eyewitness to the life of Jesus. So they kind of date like what it was written on, how it was written, what language it was written on, and they determine, does this match the language and time and the tools they used to write during the time of Jesus? And if it doesn't, then it's not considered a primary text because someone wasn't present, couldn't have been present. So if the text is in fact the lost gospel, then there's a record of it amongst the writings of the church fathers. There would be a record of it, and there isn't. So Jerome, early 5th century, mentions the gospel in the prologue of his commentary on Matthew and labels it as an unreliable apocryphal work. That's another word, apocryphal. In addition, Pope Gelasius includes the gospel in his list of apocryphal gospels. Oh, so I guess the Catholics don't accept it either. So how does it differ from reliable accounts? It focuses on the Eucharist, which is something Catholics do. Bartholomew is given a place of prominence in the text, so he sounds important there. And in addition to this, the book may also have been written to give authority to a Eucharist liturgy, which is Catholic stuff, used by a local Egyptian sect of believers. The text describes Bartholomew as being lifted into heaven to observe the heavenly liturgy celebrating the resurrection, as if to legitimize and provide authority for earthly Eucharist celebrations. So we see that this is kind of written to give authority to this tradition, which is something that we don't accept and isn't really written about in any of the other gospels or books written during that time where they could have been present. So the other book is the Questions of Bartholomew, and this is also contains passages suggesting it was written well after other apocryphal documents. For example, the Unashamed Veneration of Mary. Some have suggested it was penned as late as the 6th century, while others dated as early as the 2nd century. So the gospel exists in 3 different languages: Greek, Latin, and Slavonic, and these individual versions vary from one another. So obviously none of these are in Aramaic or Hebrew. Scholars have attempted to reconstruct the original text by layering the existing manuscripts. There is speculation that the original text was written in Coptic, like the other book, in Egypt. So this differs because it portrays Jesus as coming to earth from the Father to provide men with the secret wisdom required to heal every sin. So this is already painting Jesus in a totally different light. In addition, the text demonstrates a Gnostic view of the material body. Jesus tells his disciples he cannot tell them the secret mysteries of heaven until he puts off the body of the flesh. The text is filled with secrets related to Jesus' descent into hell prior to the resurrection, the Immaculate Conception of Mary, and secrets provided by Satan himself related to his creation and his fall. So throughout all of this, Jesus instructs Bartholomew this information is not to be shared with those who are unworthy, reflecting a Gnostic view for a esoteric language. So yeah, this is basically saying this whole book is just Bartholomew saying, oh, Jesus specifically told me this, and this, and he didn't tell any of the other disciples, and he told me that they're unworthy. That's why he didn't tell them. So there's obviously like because of this argument, there can't be other eyewitnesses or anything, and it just can't be corroborated. And of course, because of the time it was written. So it's considered unreliable because of the date of authorship. It's too late to have been penned by the real Bartholomew during his time. If this text, it was also rejected by the fathers of the church, and also the dialogue in which a key disciple of Jesus is provided with secret wisdom. So that's heretical. Really quick, how are canonical books evaluated? So they make sure witnesses were present in the first place. So during the time of Jesus, they try to find some corroboration for the claims of the witnesses. Is there any cross written? Like, for example, Mark, Luke, John, they all say similar things. They all have the same accounts. Examine the consistency and accuracy of the witnesses, and then the bias, like how they're writing and what they are writing as part of the witnesses. So this is the potential motivation for this is obviously supporting heresy or just other religious traditions that they want to include that aren't in any other book in the Bible. Like a lot of that stuff supports Catholic thought and Catholic doctrine. And yeah, more information you guys can find on coldcasechristianity.com. It's really interesting, and I recommend it if you guys have more questions about this. But yes, that's basically the whole study. I hope you guys learned something new or enjoyed reading about John 1. I recommend you guys read it more. And yeah, I really liked learning about it. So God bless you guys, and let me know if you have any questions or anything.
Thank you, Andrea. We always enjoy your Bible studies. Thank you for all the information. The last things that you gave were very, very interesting. So we should look into that website that she gave as well. And it's also interesting to understand, right? The Bible, how the books of the Bible came together. So that's what canon is, right? I believe the word canon means a collection of books. So the Bible is 66 books, and the descriptions that Andrea gave there, right? The points that these people, when they got together to put the 60 books together, they had to look. Of course, I believe number one is witnesses. I think that's very important to have witness. The person that wrote the book was actually there to see what was happening. So yeah, there's several things that were required before a book was added to what we know now is the Bible. So yeah, that was very, very interesting. And even though we don't see much of Nathanael or Bartholomew, we know that these men, like something that Andrea said in the beginning, that these men recognized that the man that was before them was the Messiah. So it's very interesting to see how they reacted when they saw Jesus Christ. Maybe in that moment, Nathanael reacted that way because, he told him where he was sitting under the fig tree. And he said, wow, you are the Son of God. And that also makes you think that Christ, the way he looked wasn't very impressive, right? That's not what attracted these men. It was what Christ did, what Christ said, his words, the words that would come out of his mouth. That's what would impress these men that followed Christ. So it's those words that touch their hearts. And I imagine once Jesus would speak, these men's su conocimiento, I don't know, everything that they had studied, I don't know, it just came to life just by seeing Jesus. Jesus Christ and doing the things that he did. And most of all, you know, I always mention compassion. I believe these men noticed that compassion that Christ had towards humanity. And that's, I don't know, that I think that's something very admirable as well, and something that we need to follow in Jesus Christ. So thank you so much, Andrea. And I'm not going to take a lot of time so you guys can participate. It'd be nice if you guys tell us what you guys think. Like she mentioned, if you guys have a question or a comment, what did you guys take away from the Bible study? So I'll go ahead and start with, let me see, I'll probably start with one of the older people. I'll start with Omar and Claudia.
God bless you. So, thank you, Andrea, for the study. And yes, it was a lot of learning, especially the last part, how you mentioned, yeah, it's more that we'll have to look into it. We know that, like the Catholic, the Bible, they have some other extra books also that our Bible doesn't have. And it was good understanding of who he was, how he was called by Jesus. And it just, I was just paying attention to John, just, let me see here. It was John 2:47 when he says, as they approached Jesus, Jesus said, now here is a genuine son of Israel, a man of complete integrity. So again, it's just something that Andrea recall. God knew him, right? He knew who he was in the spiritual way, in the spiritual side. Not that what we see in the look, out in the look. We can look nice and everything, but we know that we have a rotten heart or whatever our situation is within our heart. God knows. You know, we can fool people. I can fool you that I look good in the inside, but at the end of the day, the only one that knows, only one that knows your heart is Jesus Christ. You know, again, that's something that I kept reading right now. Again, yeah, Jesus, who he said basically in Spanish, no hay engaño. He knew who he was. Again, Christ, Jesus knew who he was calling, right? And another thing that I have learned through all the studies is after, for example, here another example, after Philip was called in, he went and grabbed Nathanael and they follow Christ. So as we can see, it's not a pattern, but that's how we see that Jesus called one disciple and here comes the next one. So that's something that I have learned through all the studies.
It was a really good study. I really enjoyed it, especially at the end. And can't wait to keep learning more. And I'll pick Adriel.
Yeah, like everyone's saying, it was really interesting to learn more about Bartholomew. Going into it, I don't think I really knew much, to be honest. But it was good to kind of learn about him, and also the last part I think is really interesting. I think it will be, well, of course we should research ourselves as well, but I don't know, I just find that topic of non-canonical books, I don't know if I said that right, but I just find those like really interesting. So it was cool to see you touch on that a little bit. But yeah, I think there was a good lesson in there, and good to kind of learn some more insight on the apostles. Yeah, so I enjoyed it. And I'll pass this on to Josue.
One thing that I liked about this lesson is about how Bartolomeo met Jesus for the first time. It was pretty good how it how Bartolomeo and Jesus both of them have met them. I'll pass this to Nathan if he wants to go.
I really like learning about this apostle that I've never heard of before, and one of the more memorable things is the study is learning that what Bartholomew really means. I never knew that it was like a way of saying, oh, this person is the son of this person. So Yeah, that's pretty cool. And is that everyone? Or is everybody gone?
We still need Miriam, Matthew, Emily.
Okay, I'll call on Emily.
Yes. So what I learned from the lesson was a bit of history, like for example, what the name meant, he was the son of someone. Another interesting thing was how him and Jesus met for the first time. Another thing was the fact that Jesus came humbly. That was something that stuck out to me. And I'll go ahead and call on Miss Miriam.
I also really like this study. I had heard about Bartholomew, but I didn't know he was an apostle, so I really liked learning about him. I also found it very interesting the part where he talked about the evaluation of the books. I never really thought about it too deeply, but like it makes sense that like there's like requirements and like they evaluate things like to make sure like everything makes sense and it's credible. So yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, that's call on Matthew.
Hi, hello. Sorry I was late. But thank you, Andrea. I took part of the study. I'll go back and watch the rest on YouTube. But yeah, I kind of echo everyone else, and in agreeing, yeah, I didn't also know too much about Bartholomew. That they had an interesting name. But yeah, I just like how you got all those verses to explain about his life and about the other things, especially when you were talking about um like the verses how God like pre um predetermined things, and it's kind of awesome, especially like today, right? There's so much insecurity. There's like no security. Everything's so volatile and unstable. Um, like to know that we really don't gotta just try simple. Well, we do have to try hard, but like not focus on life like that. Like makes everything a bit easier. So thank you, and yeah, I think that's everybody.
Yes, that's it. That's everybody. Thank you guys. Thank you for sharing. And I guess the points that to me stand out of Bartholomew is a man that had his heart, like Andrea said, in the right place. Right? He was a man that was seeking God. They had knowledge of all the prophecies. They would probably read through the scrolls, and they were waiting for the Messiah to come. And his heart was in the right place when the Messiah finally came. And then it's also another point, is beautiful to know that God knows everything. He's omniscient. So he knows all your thoughts, all your desires. And when your heart is in the right place, he gives you the desires of your heart. He blesses your life. He gives you spiritual growth. Everything that you need, we find it in Christ. So knowing that God knows me completely, Psalms 139 is about that. He knows everything. He knows when you stand up, when you lay down, everything that you do. And then God keeps working in our lives, and he loves us, even though he knows us more than anybody else in this world. And that's just nice to know, right? He loved us before we were even born. While we were in our mother's womb, he knew everything about that's all really beautiful. So hopefully you guys meditate on that and get closer to our God. Let's get closer to our Jesus Christ. who loves us with that. He even gave his life for us. So hopefully that motivates you guys. It really motivates me to serve him even more. So thank you. If nobody else has anything else, I just wanted to move a little forward and talk about the event, which is on Friday, right? Really quick.